And if we go through like a 20 minutes and we're all familiar, I don't know how to load documents or what we're allowed to load, but, and I'll use Fairfield Cares as an example. And I think it'll be clear to everybody as we move forward.
It seems like we should probably have someone who sort of does that, you know, whose kind of job it is to just take that on. That way we can control, you know, what goes up essentially, because whatever is on there, we are responsible for. And again, I think if we were to sort of like train the whole group, then the way to do it becomes public. So probably it would be best to have like a, I don't know, webmaster or whatever we want to call that.
I agree.
position.
I think we need to kind of dive in though. If you look at Fairfield, if we use it as a reference, if you look at it, it'll be clear.
And I think that person, whoever it becomes, should coordinate with Alex, because Alex is also submitting to the town, you know, the minutes and all of that. So, and to the webmaster, the recordings. So we should make sure we're all coordinating.
Ryan?
There is a tab when you go to the, you know, the section on the website for the task force. One of the tabs says files and documents already. So like that's where the meeting, you know, the meeting that I reviewed, that's where the link was. So I don't know, that might be a kind of natural place to put things to.
That's
already set up.
Perfect.
Yeah, I agree.
Share what that link that you were just referring to actually is, because I'm like, wait, you know, that would be good for us all to have bookmarked perhaps.
Yeah, it's on the town website, like under the task force, there's like a few tabs on the side.
Yeah.
And I did see that.
I'll send it to you.
Okay.
Ryan or Steve, if you could put that in the chat, then Jamie, it would be great if you could add that to the notes as well.
Yeah, I'm not able to copy Sophia's. I'm sorry. I wonder if she could, Sophia, could you email that to the group or?
The PDF or the?
Yeah, the presentation PDF.
Sure. Which email should I?
You know what, Sophia, you have my email. If you just email it to me, then I'll get it to her.
Okay.
I don't know that I have your email.
It's on the, I'm on the, you know, the ward,
Or mine.
I'm blanking. I got emailed this afternoon with you. I'm on the same, yeah.
Okay, I'll look for it there. Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Just lost my ability to speak English. All right. So would anyone be interested in taking on sort of the role of uploader?
I can do that.
Okay. Thanks, Ryan. That'd be
Sure.
fantastic. So
Hey,
So we
Ryan,
will-
thank you.
Welcome.
thank you very much.
No problem.
So we can coordinate if there's anything that you would like to have uploaded into the repository. You'll send it to Ryan, and then you can be in charge of making sure that gets up there, Ryan.
Okay, I'll figure out who, it have to be somebody at the town that actually uploads it, but I'll get it to them and I'll figure that out. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. All right. So if we don't have anything else,
Can I just,
Alex is.
can I
Yep.
ask a question about that though? I mean, do we want, this is Doug, I'm not sure we want everyone to have individual authority to send stuff to Ryan to be posted or loaded? Is there a check process for a
I do think
committee
it should
or
go
a,
to me and Gina.
so it goes, has to go through you or Gina to be approved? Excellent. Okay.
And then.
Yeah, and we can work with Ryan on that too.
Okay.
Okay, next is on the agenda is item 6, to review and consider questions from the public forum on 6/2020. I think that was
That's me.
Ryan.
Yeah.
Take it away, Ryan.
Okay, so I just went back and reviewed and listened to the meeting, which was about an hour and a half long, from June 11th, 2020, which it's posted in that file and document section. If you haven't seen it, I think it's informative if you can find an hour and a half to watch it again. But I'll give you just an overview of my impressions of it. The panel, the format was, how many people actually viewed that? So I'm not totally repeating. Okay, oh, great. So not that many people. So this is a panel that was formed, a meeting that was organized out of Brenda Kupchik's office. And it was the meeting where the task force was announced, that the task force was going to take place and that Nancy was going to be kind of leading up that effort to create the task force. There was a panel of people, including the first selectman, the two selectmen, the state legislative leaders, one member of the RTM, the police chief and the police captain, and it was moderated by the rabbi from Bethel. There was each of the members on the panel took quite a bit of time, like making opening statements that were meant to kind of set the tone for the meeting. And I've just kind of summarized from that. I took a lot of notes on each person and tried to just summarize in general what I was hearing from them. The most that would also in mind that would inform your work, because in essence, this meeting kind of set a charge for the task force, which of course the mission and statement reflect somehow, but I found that this conversation kind of was more about original intent, you know, and one of the most consistent messages from all of those people were that this was just a beginning conversation, that there were going to be many more conversations, many more, everybody, many more conversations to come. And that through these conversations, which would be initiated by the task force on behalf of the town, the people of Fairfield will have an opportunity to share their feelings. That there will be an opportunity to listen to Black members of the community, and that would be a priority. That these meetings should be conducted with openness and vulnerability, and that people should be active listeners in the process. The white participants should be aware of their privilege and fragility as they participate and openly acknowledge the history of the Black race in this country. That the meeting should be used as a way to repair wrongs and demonstrate the town's commitment to learn, grow, and change. All participants should look inward and acknowledge learned racial bias, as well as the intersectionality of other oppressive forces. And, you know, a big plea to, it's time to take responsibility for wrongdoing. We need to be open to hate, bigotry, racism needs to be called out. The town must take responsibility for wrong action and acknowledge inequality. While lifting up the voices of the Black members of our community, we need to look at our systems and make changes as needed. We need to keep in mind different viewpoints as we channel voice to solution. There was clear message from the panel that there's no one is above the law, and that an examination of local law enforcement should be part of the work through an independent review. The police officers that were participating expressed openness to this community dialogue and welcoming the opportunity to reflect on their practices, which they want to be transparent about. They want to be they want to be actively listening to people of color in the community, and to work to cultivate a place where people of color feel comfortable walking in the streets of Fairfield. So that was, you know, kind of an overview of the panel, both their opening and their ending comments. There were questions from the public, about 100, which I didn't mention up front, but there were places for 100 community members to actively be part of the meeting. You could also, more people could watch. I know I watched, I didn't get in that initial first 100, but there was an opportunity for them to ask questions. About 9 people from the public asked questions. The first question out of the box was a very long list of questions for the police department. And those questions actually were responded to by the police chief. And I know those kind of circulated. I can't remember, did everybody get them? But I know I have a copy of them, maybe that came from Gina or Nancy. where he did go through and after the meeting, try to respond to each one of those questions. There was a teacher who talked about systemic racism in the schools and asked the question about how far people would go in terms of making things right, such as would you raise your taxes? Would you stop tracking kids in school? Would you regionalize the schools? Other people asked again about defunding the police, what actions were going to be taken. Another person asked about systemic racism in the police. And of course, police, it was very front and center because of the timing of the meeting. It was noted that the panel only had one Black person on it, so the public was not hearing from Black voices in the dialogue, and that there was a need to dialogue more with more diverse voices around the table. It was noted with a lot of passion from one person that this was not the first, quote, first conversation that for over a year, there had been conversations going on in town about equity and justice, and through an anti-racist group, the Ubuntu group and the Fairfield Ubuntu group, and that they had been meeting for over a year with the police and addressing issues. It was noted that white fragility and implicit bias is present and could grow from ignorance. Kind of alluding to like a possibility for educational opportunities. There were more questions about the police using body cameras and so forth. And there was another caller that criticized the police right out of the box being praised automatically, like at the meeting. And again, noted that the work had been going on in Fairfield for a while. There was a mention also of a group called Diversity Conversations. And so that basically is a summary. My kind of takeaways from it were a couple of things. One, that the task force probably should be going back and looking at what happened with the diversity conversations. That there needs to be a connection with Fairfield Ubuntu as well to see what they've been doing. We need to make sure that any responses to questions like from the police chief or maybe part, posted in public, and maybe that can be a document. Further conversation was promised from this group very strongly, above all else and in abundance. So deep listening in small specific groups should be kind of a core strategy of the task force in all focus areas. This should be done in conversation as well as survey, so the community feels deeply heard and that there's a true sense of the current situation in town from many perspectives. Conversations need to be honest and carried out with vulnerability and without defensiveness. Be ready to change directions with the findings. There's a need for more education of the public on racism. How to provide it should maybe be addressed by the task force. Again, these are just my thoughts after having viewed this. All of the panelists felt this work was shared. And I thought that was something that you need to keep in mind, or that we need to keep in mind, is that we need to continually engage these leaders, our legislative leaders and the town leaders, in what is going on with the committee and ask them for their help in the process and keep them engaged along the way. And that areas of investigation indicated by the public questions were primarily about police, education, and a mention of housing. And that probably those might be the areas to focus most specifically in, based on that conversation. So.
Thank
That's
you
it.
so much, Ryan. That was a great summary. I was there too, and I think you covered a lot. Nancy and Tamisha, who's not on the call, were actually part of that meeting. So Nancy, was there anything that you wanted to add?
No, thank you, Ryan. I think you're being really considerate and thoughtful about the nature of the discussion. I think there was a lot of frustration, and for me, the takeaway was and again, I say this with all due respect. I know I serve with the first select woman, and very happy that she has enabled and made it possible for this task force to exist, because really without her support, we wouldn't have this government supported work anyway. But I think part of the problem, it was billed as a community conversation. And what it was mostly elected officials sharing their own thoughts and opinions on the situation, as almost, I just don't think it was a true public discussion. I think what happened was the elected officials, me included, had a chance in 2 minutes to say what we were feeling, which really wasn't the point, nor should it matter, because we were, as you pointed out, mostly white. But also the people had some really legitimate feelings, questions, pains, frustrations, and there wasn't an opportunity to answer them in a productive way. And this ties into my feeling so strongly about these listening, that Dan Iacovella has talked about, these listening projects, and the importance of Ryan, what you're alluding to, is the importance of having some of these community conversations, because I still think where we failed the community all these months later is to give people an opportunity to be heard, to voice their questions, to voice their frustrations, to not be defensive, to share their experiences. Gina and I have had an opportunity to really talk about some things, and I have a safe place where I can say something really effing stupid, and she can be like, yeah, we've been telling you that for a really long time. And then I have to sit with that and deal with that. And I think that there is so much work to be done as a community that, to me, part of the important work the task force has to do is answer some of that, because it is clear that there is a real void, and that people were crying out for it in that forum. And so it was a little painful, frankly. And again, I'm grateful for it, so I don't mean the disrespect, but I now think we have an opportunity. It was painful to sit with some of that, kind of like where we didn't answer people, where they were just in a void. And I think people have probably gone like, well, all right, yeah, more of the same. And so I just think that our work, the blueprint, that is, the laser focus. But in the process of coming up with that blueprint, I really do hope that we will give the public and the community an opportunity to actually have these conversations and to do the difficult, and I'll use Rory's word that she taught me, that Gina, the difficult soul work, because until we can kind of go there, some of this is moot to me. So, Ryan, thank you. You did give a very thorough summary, but as I said to Gina, it's a little bit triggering too to hear about it, because I was left feeling so like anxious that we didn't accomplish what we kind of needed to, except for maybe the forming of this group, which this is the next step. So, I'm rambling a little bit, but.
Yeah, and I think the takeaway again, that I said, the most consistent message, which just as in the flurry of the last few meetings of what do we do and how we go and the survey and this whatever, is to remember that even in that, the whole idea, just what you're saying, these conversations and this kind of deep listening was really the core charge of that meeting, and was seen as what really needed to be done. That was the most consistent messaging, even from all, from the town body leaders or whatever, at the time. And it was very much a void, but, and then the questions from the public kind of lay a little bit of a blueprint of, yeah, these are the core areas, of investigation. So,
and I think it just hearing what you guys are saying, I think that it would be really prudent of us, and we can build this into our research plan, but have these conversations that are all based on listening and empathy and seeking understanding, and not to share out, but to take in. But we also have to keep in mind the importance of some tangible action steps to make people think it's not just more of the same. Like, I'm telling people what's going on and they're not listening to me, because what people mean by that is nothing's changing. So we may need to conclude each conversation or something with, what are some things you'd like to see happen? So, you know, again, that can all go into the research plan with how, and be a part of how we talk to people, but we're, you know, it's so exciting to hear Sophia talk about one thing, one change in a headmaster to a head principal. That's one really tangible thing that shows, by the way, we're paying attention, and we probably need to stagger some of those into our work over the next, you know, 14 months.
Karen, I think that's a really great point. And even though I was on that call, I actually forgot until you just mentioned, Ryan, how much, you know, the frustration, I was actually one of the 100 on the call. And so the frustration in the chat from people who were watching it, who really felt like this wasn't what it was billed as, which is, you know, an opportunity for people to be heard. It was more of, you know, just something else, and how people really want that. And I think I definitely blocked out that was put out as the charge of this committee, because, you know, to that end, that was 5 months ago, and in the intervening time, we've had some massive, you know, upheaval in the world that at some point we as a committee have to, you know, think about what we feel our role is, you know, as a response to these things that happen in the world. You know, is that something that we feel is, you know, part of our mandate, that we should respond to things? Is it that, you know, we are going to be elevating other conversations in the community? Because if that you're reminding me that that people were really concerned about, you know, whether or not this committee was just going to be figurehead and just going to be about, you know, a way to put a rubber stamp on the idea that the town is committed to equity, but that the committee itself is the sum total of what, you know, the town's commitment is. And that was something that was really important when Nancy and I were, you know, working with the Board of Selectmen initially, to not make it that, to make sure that we weren't just going to be a way to say, yes, we have done something about equity, we made a committee that we're no longer going to pay any attention to. You know, we want to make this an active body. Doug?
Yeah, I was just saying, you know, this will sort of lead into the best practices review thing, but you look at what other towns have done, a lot of them have done just that. They've created a committee and trumpeted that and announced that, and then that's that. And that's pretty much what they've done. So I think as we really think about the listening groups and conceptualize that as really an active part of the way we're going to engage the community, and make it more than just a one panel meeting every year or something like that. There's some structure we have for ongoing engagement at this soul level. And build off of that, not just because that in and of itself is of value, in my opinion, but I think also in service of building commitment and engagement and investment and actual planning and tangible change. So I think we've got sort of like these two camps, like, do we meet the emotional need or do we deliver the tangibles? And I think we want to think about how we, you know, leverage the emotional engagement to build, you know, commitment to change.
Doug, if I could just add to that, because I think that emotion in some ways, it's all kind of part of the same. I think it's quantitative, qualitative. To me, it's like you don't separate. I mean, yes, they're very separate things, but they can inform each other. And but also don't think we should underestimate or undermine the value of that emotional piece, because for some people, they need to experience some of that before they can even begin the work. And that's why I alluded to like this idea of the soul work, because until we touch people, there are going to be some people that we just don't reach unless we first go through that pathway.
That's actually what I was trying to say. If it came across differently, I'll change that. I actually think the soul work's essential, and I just think it actually sets us up to actually deliver the change too, or deliver the tangible changes. If I had to choose, I'd go more soul all the time, but I think to Karen's point, we're going to have to deliver some policy recommendations too, so.
So I know that there was a conversation on June 24th that Riney just sent me in the chat with in Fairfield Faces Racism Lecture with Mara Gottlieb that Fairfield Cares put on. And so, you know, well, two things. One, I wanted to say, to find if anybody wanted to either add something to Ryan's presentation or just have more discussion on that. Alip?
If I could just circle back a little bit, thank you, Ryan, for bringing that up, because it's been on my mind as well, and I really love the way that you laid it out. I wanted to circle back a little bit only because I wanted to find out if somehow that call was recorded, because I listened in on that call also, and I think that we need to be mindful about kind of like redoing stuff that's already done, right? I remember there was someone on the call that said that he had statistics on like the policing and all this other stuff. And there was someone from Ubuntu who said that they had met with the police chief. I think it was, might have been Amanda. I think we have some foundation work that we can build on from that call. So I'm just wondering if that call was recorded.
It was, and it was, I believe was it Fair TV that you tuned in, Ryan? I'll have to find the link, but you watched it, so maybe you could share the link. You're on mute.
Yes. Yeah, I can share the link. It's if you go to the task force website, go to files and docs, it's right there. I can't remember whether it's Fair TV or whether it's YouTube.
Yeah, I think it might have been YouTube now that you mention it.
Yeah.
And
it's definitely YouTube. I'm remembering now. Yeah.
And
Yep.
Riney may want to speak to it, but I was the sort of moderator of the discussion that Fairfield Cares had and the Senior Center had presented with Mara. And that presentation, there was a lot interesting there that might be a good reference to.
I'm just thinking it can cut some time on all the stuff that we're doing. Like, I mean, because some people did mention some statistics on there, and we can somehow, even though they're not a part of this group, maybe we can somehow try to reach out to those people.
Yeah, you know, it was a history. There was some history. It was an understanding of how we got here. I think there might be a place for it in terms of having, yeah, Ronnie just posted the link to it. That it will necessarily inform that it's, I mean, it's parallel in the sense that it's work and it's all resonant and parallel, but I don't know, other than there was some history there, which could be important. So yeah, if someone is interested in kind of going back, but you can read more, you know, thank you, Riney, for posting that. And maybe
I think also too, the other interesting part about it is that there were a lot of very involved community members who you know have been involved directly with the work, who are working separately. And I'm wondering if thinking about hosting another conversation is something we should consider, and that would probably be a good way to bring those people back, together to hear from them again. Because there were people who kind of came, fully loaded with a lot of facts, and that might be, they might be looking for an outlet. Sophia?
I may add, I was also on the community conversation and the comment period, asked a number of questions directed at Chief Liddy. And afterwards, he sent a document with the answers to those questions with a number of statistics and figures. I was wondering if the group has that document, and if not, I can forward that to you.
I think we do, but you know what? Can you send us another copy just to be sure to see?
We definitely have it.
I remembered he'd shared it, but I am also wondering if what he shared with the teen group is different than what he shared with. I would be interested in seeing what he shared with you, because I remember seeing it twice.
Yeah, if I could just piggyback on that, because I'm also a part of the Courageous Conversations with Susan, and Amanda Hansen, who's with Ubuntu, has also mentioned meeting with the police chief. So I'm not sure if she might be able to share any of her meeting information with us to help us to get, just to get a foot on it.
I think Chief Liddy's pretty open to speaking with people. Is that somebody we want to speak with directly rather than going through other sources of information? Like
Yeah,
what haven't we?
I mean, I'm sure he would be willing. He
Yeah.
is actually quite open.
Yeah.
Do we want to maybe invite him to a meeting?
Yeah, so I was wondering back to the conversation we had last week, and Gina, sorry, I cut you off. But I was gonna say the questions that Ryan was referring to, remember that list of questions he did attempt to answer, and he answered most of them. The reason some of them were left blank is he felt they were not necessarily his purview. But Ryan, back to your question, those questions that Chief Liddy was asked on that public community conversation in June, there was no forum for it. I think that was part of the problem. A gentleman
Yeah.
spewed off that laundry list of questions. We never circled back to the community to say, here are the answers to your questions. So when
That's why I was thinking, that's why I was saying, anything that was responded to, it seems the responsibility of the task force to get that out.
Yep.
And to show at least good faith there that, yeah.
Definitely. And I think part of the research plan, and I'm always like, okay, what's the next step? What's our action? Like, what's the actionable items from our meeting? For me and Karen, this is the piece, and Alex and Sonia, it's a little confusing to me how we kind of keep this ball going down the field. And I don't know why I'm using a sports analogy, because it's like so far from my understanding, but how we keep it moving has to include some of the community conversations with the different, like the listening groups. And I think the police piece, talking to the chief of police, answering those questions is a good place to start, but how does it inform like the research plan, and how do we go to the next step? So I agree with what.
Can we
Yeah.
move through the agenda, and maybe I'll try to help this whole conversation a little bit?
Well, I wanted to move on to the next, actually, if we are kind of finishing about this meeting, the next item on the agenda is actually, you're actually up next with
Right.
Steve to discuss to hear and consider your findings from the best practices. So why don't you start
Right.
there?
Amy has a question though first.
Yeah, I do have one. I've heard Nancy speak about this several times, and it's come up today again, that there's a lot of soul work that is needed. And people here have reiterated that. So Nancy, and I come from a place of, I will give you an example of what we were, when I was listening in onto the meeting last week with the group who was doing this, with the teachers group who was doing this. They were coming from a very good place. They were coming from a place of love, and they were coming from a place of really wanting to do things right. And yet the sensitivity, and I don't want to use the word, yet not knowing what is right. So I want to be, just to mention that when you begin this work where you've had what we call the white privilege, even when the white privilege wants to do the right thing, they may not have the tools. It may come across in a different way. And it's not to say that they're not doing it with the best intentions. There needs to be a recognition that it is coming from that place. There's a lot of learning to be done. Nancy, you raised a point that you can say anything to Gina, and Gina will say, yes, that's what I've been telling you. Well, that happened because of trust and years of that. And then there is complete understanding, the two of you are on the same page. So to bring people on that same page, or to have that kind of patience and understanding, and not be so hard on the ones who are going to take it a little longer to get there. Because I can tell you that this is not, white privilege is so ingrained that you do not even recognize it. It is part of your DNA. It is part of your language. It is part of the way you walk. It's the part of the way you assert yourself into a room, where we, the people of so-called color, are intimidated just by that. So to come from that place, and it's not that we're not there, we're not equally intelligent or anything, but it's because you have that history behind you, you have that whatever it is behind you. But I'm also equally aware that that is not going to happen overnight. It's not going to be a huge wave. It's going to be bit by bit. And the ones who will do it is not the people of color. I can tell you that. The ones who are going to do it is the people of the white privilege, who become sensitive enough to walk in the shoes of the people of color. Your voice as a white person is so important in today's world, in this part of the conversation. And to speak with that, what you speak to another, and I dislike this word white. I have never used it except in the last 6 months. What you say to your fellow beings, because we are 80% in Fairfield of that color, is much more powerful than what we say. Because you have come to that understanding, you will speak that language far better than what we say it. So it's critical that the burden is really on the white color right now, for you to understand the pain of the color which is not white, to walk in our shoes, to see it at every level. And it is not that the law will say that. Laws are very good, but laws don't change hearts. Hearts need to be changed for really the law to be implemented. So part of that work, Nancy, is really for you, for we need more Nancys and more Ginas, that friendship. That way you can speak. And when you speak to me, you don't look at my color. And I know you don't look at my color.
Well, I would only correct you. Yeah, I look at your color, but I celebrate your color. I'm not trying to say it's not, it makes
Right.
you.
But it's not even a question, Nancy, of celebrating. I don't want to be celebrated. I want to be
Well,
treated
whatever,
just like,
I recognize
yeah.
it. I recognize
Yes.
But ultimately, I think, and I think you make a lot of good solid points. And I think one of the things that we really considered in putting this task force together is this is a microcosm of what we're trying to build, right? We're trying to build, we have people on this call who are from very different backgrounds, racially, politically, in terms of gender. We really tried to cover, as much as we could with what was presented to us, because at the end of the day, that is the whole point of this work. It is not just solely about how, and I think I said this to every single person that I spoke to, this isn't about mean behavior. This isn't about how to make people feel better about others. It's about how do we all share this community, and how do we make this community what we say it is? Because everybody, we all say that this is a community of fairness, but really that's our mandate. That's what underlies all of this. And we specifically chose the group that we chose. We tried to really cut a swath across that so that we have different, different input. And I think we talked a little bit about that last week when people were introducing themselves, but it was something that just stood out to us as we were interviewing, and even more so with the people who continued who we wanted to have, like this is
So-
what, having Dan and Ryan and Jamie and, Ryan, there were so many people that could bring those voices. So I think our position is really about making this small microcosm of the community to sort of, hold up a mirror to the town, but also to hold up, we're a reflection of the town as well. And that is, something that this task force has to our benefit, is that we are from different, walks of life. And the fact is, we are in the midst of a very, contentious election as we speak, and yet we are all having a conversation where we all have the same goals and we are all moving forward. And that really, more than anything, is what we need, what we're trying to model, right? Like, I am not asking people to be different than what they are and to have different, approaches to their, political ideals. What I'm asking is to appreciate that fairness is fairness, and that we are all kind of taking our different backgrounds and putting it together to create a sense of fairness. So yeah, I think that's pretty great. To that end, I do want to get to Doug and Steve to talk a little bit about what other communities have been doing to kind of figure out how we're going to shape ourselves going forward. So do you want to take that on?
Well, we got the last 3 minutes here. No, I mean, I really appreciate everybody's enthusiasm. I think, the information you gave Ryan is critical. I'd like to be able to have it somewhere that I could understand it. I think we need to stop a second and just get organized. This committee needs to be more organized than anything I've ever been involved with. And all the stuff we just went through, I mean, I need to have it in some kind of document or form or something that we can all understand, that we can all refer to and say, turn to page 3. Okay, now. So to that end, I'm gonna share my screen and we're gonna talk about what we did with other towns and kind of, because I'm not so sure like what you're gonna tell me after we go through it. So I put it together in a form of just a document of work in progress. I'm a sports guy, Nancy, so I put it in the form of a playbook.
So then you can understand the metaphor better than I did when I was using it.
Say that again?
You can understand my metaphors better than I do when I'm even using them.
Yeah, I understand them. I understand, yes. So I don't know if you guys can see my screen or not, but
Yes.
I took basically everything that you gave us so far in writing and put it into a document and we were tasked with looking at other towns and coming up with best practices from other towns or start on it. Excuse me. But I wanted to backtrack and start and talk about like what our mission is and kind of read it again and to make sure, because I'm not sure we're going to be doing a lot of the work that we're talking about. I think maybe we're just going to be making the recommendation and giving them a framework and say, here, maybe it's going to be, we recommend that you have a permanent task force and that this is how they go about doing it based on, the data that Karen's going to provide and our listening activities. So this is an effort to try to get it organized. It's using the words that we have so far. You tell me if we're going to be really doing it or if we're going to, if we are going to be doing it, I think what you guys were alluding to, I'm not ready to sit into a Fairfield Yabantu meeting as a representative of the racial equity and expect to come back with a actionable plan to them today. I need to know how to listen to them and I need to know what the rules of engagement are for me to come back and respond to their requests. And I think Ryan, the information you took, if we kind of synthesize that into a document that will go into our overall plan, it'll make sense.
Yeah, I do have that in a document, so.
So yeah, this is just part of the plan. Karen's would be another part of the plan, as we understand it. So the mission's there. Are we going to be doing the work or not? I suggest we reread it and follow Gina and Nancy's lead on that. The scope of work, we're doing the data, to be doing the active listening, and we're going to talk about best practices, blah, blah, blah. And ultimately, we're going to leave them with a blueprint. And the blueprint is, I don't know what that is, but I'd imagine it's going to be a master plan and the website that has all the stuff that we're going to organize and give it to them. And it's going to make sense. So that's me. I'm overly organized, and I think, you know, I'm a sales guy, so pictures and words really help me. These are all stuff you gave us as I scroll through: the keys to the task force, the database, the community engagement. We need to understand how we're supposed to be listening. I wanted to stop here for the guiding principles. Stop. What we found is from the other towns is there's basic frameworks. There's a lot of them out there. They're all say similar things, and I'm gonna let Doug dive into it a little deeper. But we wanted to put it into a document that's kind of like our game plan that makes the most sense. This is a work in progress. We hope that you guys, you know, build on it. And Doug, you might want to touch on some of this. I'm not sure.
I'll just reference
But at the
that
end of the day,
a lot of what Steve will review, what we're reviewing right now, the two other documents that went out, one is the GARE, two PDFs, one on advancing racial equity and then a racial equity toolkit. All this stuff that we're reviewing tonight is elaborated in endless detail in those reports, but they're really fascinating if you really want to look in more detail what other cities and towns are doing and where these best practices were sort of, you know, distilled from, or you know, what we boiled down here. I really recommend that. So those two documents I think would be good examples of things we probably want to put on the repository, just as you know, if anyone in the public's interested in why we're moving in these directions. A lot of detail there.
so the framework is going to include. Actually, I'll let you roll with it, Doug. Go ahead.
All right, well, yeah, so I'll go off your screen, Steve. So if you want to just keep on. So I just think it would be
Okay.
useful. I'm going to just backtrack a little bit and say part of my struggle as we're getting started is we have such an amorphous, deeply meaningful, you know, from soul work to, you know, tangible recommendations. So there's such a broad scope here. It is a little overwhelming. So I did sort of lapse into geek speak a little bit to try to like get this down to, you know, what are our basic checkpoints, or this may even actually lead into like, these are our standing working committees on these different aspects or different planks of a program to address this stuff. But just having a common definition of what we're aiming for with racial equity, I thought the Government Alliance and Race and Equity GARE one was pretty useful because it immediately goes to the data. So when race can no longer be used to predict life outcomes and outcomes for all groups are improved. So it doesn't end up being just about, you know, what's benefiting the minority group, but actually convincing people in a deep way that the work we're doing actually is going to improve the quality of life in general for everyone here. These basic steps here, just go up a little bit, Steve. Back.
It's a lag in it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Two more. Yeah. There we go. So the first step that showed up in reviewing a lot of these different plans and a lot of sort of the clearinghouses for these plans is the importance of creating a racial equity guiding statement. And the key piece of that is really developing and writing down and coming to consensus about what the racial history is and the racial history story is for our town. I think we have our initial steps working in that, just in terms of the connection to the museum. But that might be one of the projects we start to line up right away is something that we want to have a deliverable on. Our goal ultimately is to develop some citywide equity goals and create the tangible objectives and ways to measure them. And just cutting right to the chase, what we're gonna throw out tonight are just some examples of actual tools or tools being series of questions that we might envision being part of the normal day in, day out work of the various committees in town, various departments in town, that really make, in a deliberate way, make people start to ask questions about what the implications of any decision might be at a town level for racial equity and social justice. It gets baked into the day in, day out work of what we're doing. So there's some things here taken from the Annie Casey Foundation on just why it's useful to use these tools. I won't, you can read them on your own, but you know, as we start to work towards helping people get to a point where they're comfortable with using this tool, because it's going to feel probably like a new burden to them. You know, I think we can develop some programming or educational programming on how we teach people to use these things. And then essentially across all the towns I looked at, and at the end of this, there are some examples and references for other towns. These are the essential questions. Steve, you can go up just a bit. All right.
Oh, you're back up. Okay.
Right there. Good, great. Just an example. So this was the 5-question equity analysis that, you know, so for any policy decision, any proposal, any sort of new decision that's being made at a town level, you know, what are the racial, or who are the racial ethnic groups in the area, and how's this program going to affect them? This would be a report that people actually have to write. Do the current disparities exist by, or do current disparities exist by race, ethnicity around this issue? So you get the point, but this is something that would be, I think we would ultimately be recommending that people build into the decision-making process in town.
Gina, basically what Gina was saying.
Yep, exactly. So it actually, I think if we really think about the importance of developing the racial equity statement, got, you know, in history, really have a focus on building community engagement, and we start to do some work on how we translate that into setting objectives and measuring them, I think we then start to have a blueprint for what we do. Best practices from other towns. The most relevant one is right next door in Team Westport. And Steve did a deep dive into what Team Westport's been doing.
Yeah, since 2003. Yeah, they started this task force with Diane Farrell. Nancy, you probably know her, obviously. 2003, and
Yep.
This is, you know, they have a pretty mature, on paper, pretty mature. It's just kind of the goals that we're aiming for.
So, I mean,
So
one of
you
the
guys-
things I think we might want to move just as an action step for tonight is to really, in some formal way, I guess, reach out to the Team Westport leadership and really go meet with them, sit with them, understand what they know now that they wish they knew then.
Yeah, and just to interject there, Melissa Kane, who is their equivalent in Westport of my position, the minority select woman, I've already reached out to her. So once I hear back, I'll let you know.
Okay, so I think if that would be, you know, to come back to report to this group on that meeting, I think, or that series of meetings, I think would be really helpful.
So
Hey,
just,
was that Nancy who's reaching out to them? I don't know who said that they were.
Yeah, just
That was
because
Nancy,
she happens to be a friend of mine. So
One of the questions that I have would be if they could share surveys they've already created so we
Right.
can take a look at those. I mean, that to me would be a key time saver is, you know,
Oh.
I'm not saying we'd use them verbatim, but would they be openly sharing what they did and to what, you know?
I know they published or posted their results from a survey they did in the school system out about microaggressions. And then the notes I have for all this, I have some more of their data. So they clearly created that survey, and I'm sure we could, you know,
right here,
get that and look at that.
survey recommendations right here you asked for?
So these are actually the recommendations. They're actually somewhere in their website, or a link to the actual responses. So you can actually sort of dig into what kids and people were saying about what the survey was asking. But these are the recommendations.
So this is an example of something that we would recommend, but we wouldn't be doing. That's
Correct, right. Not this particular group wouldn't be doing it, but we'd be
right.
pushing the town to, make it a formal part of the process.
And these are examples of some of the stuff that they do, that they put on. And if I went to a different month, I might be able to find the survey that they put on, but yeah.
But I will say, Jen, I think I alluded to this earlier, there's such a wide range of what different towns are doing. And I sort of did just sort of the obvious usual suspects in Westchester and Fairfield and other parts of Connecticut. And most of them are at the level of we should really, there's some town pronouncement that we should pay attention to this and it's an important issue. And then you can't find anything else. So I think we're going to probably have to look at what some of the best practices have been, lessons learned from these larger initiatives in some bigger towns like Seattle and Madison, Wisconsin, and Portland and other things, and really use their outlines to start to map out what we think our basic structure should be.
Okay.
That was really wonderful. Thank you for that. I think that's a really great just foundation for us to build off of. I love all that. Do we want to, give that to everyone on the task force to kind of really take the time with, digest, and then come back?
I mean, it's so.
It did get
Karen,
sent.
Karen,
It was in an email, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It got
Are you,
sent out
do
by
you have your write-up on the data stuff? I mean, that would just go, it would just be a section in the overall plan, you know what I mean, Gina?
We don't have any write-up on any data stuff right now. Alexandra has data that she, the demographic
But I mean,
data.
as far as like an approach, as far as like like your methodology is more than.
Yeah, so we don't have anything. I don't know if we're segueing into that right now.
Yep, we can go ahead.
We have a meeting, our group, it's been a rough week to get our minds melded and have a meeting time. So we have a meeting scheduled for Monday where we will be digging into, like, rolling up the sleeves and developing the plan. What's feeding into it, which is what we were kind of waiting on for this week, is number one, that all that demographic data, we needed to see that. And then also kind of this idea of best practices, because we didn't want to create any wheels if there are some wheels out there. But now we can take this and that information and compile a solid plan for what we'll probably be able to then present our recommendation at the next meeting. So that, from the way I see it now, that will include maybe conversations with some of the individuals that are listed in this best practices report, where we're simply asking them, from a benchmarking standpoint, what's worked well for you, what would you do differently? Just a simple few questions. So maybe we can make those types of phone calls. Certainly we can consider whether the chief of police is a group conversation or whether we're having, an in-depth interview. I like to call those things like expert interviews, as opposed to, where you're listening to consumers, if you will. So I think that we have to have that meeting on Monday where we start to unpack all of the possibilities for the conversations that we have and the surveys that we want to send out, now that we know the demographic profile and kind of some best practices.
Okay.
Thank you, Karen.
And I say, I know I have some more detail on the data aspects of best practices. So let me yank that out and get that to you too. So
Oh, that'd be great, Doug. Thank you.
Awesome. There's an item on the agenda about to hear and consider updates on surveys and other research. So that is, you don't have a name next to that, Nancy? Did I lose Nancy?
So Gina, can you just say again the item number, because I missed it for some
Number
reason?
8, to hear and
What
consider
is it?
updates. To hear and consider updates on surveys and other research.
I think that was part of, what Alex was gonna look at, but maybe I conflated it and.
I wonder
Yeah,
if it
because
was
the next one
previous
is,
surveys, like if there were any previous surveys we were able to get our hands on.
Mhm. Yep.
and so the one survey is the one that Sophia told us about, that the not the high school equity group, the alumni equity group worked on, and that there are two that are going around with the teachers. And who was the other one that you said, Sophia? That came up at the meeting, at the board meeting? I think she said that there were two more surveys that are going to be going out as well. Who's the other one?
So I think they've concluded with the student survey, but I believe the teacher and administrator survey is going to be sent out now that it's been approved by the board.
Yeah. And then I know that Sonia brought up the last meeting that she thought there was another survey, but I wasn't able to find anything. Did anyone else come up with another survey that's been going around?
I mean, we should make it an action item to find out. We got to start figuring out, follow up on some of these actions.
Yeah.
I'd like to know, you want me to find out from Sonia, or?
Yes.
Because she definitely mentioned another survey that would come in handy if we had it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm actually here.
Oh,
Yeah, sorry. That was that's what I had brought up, that I thought the town of Fairfield had actually sent something out.
Yeah, no, the town has not. I think Sophia, the one Sophia was referring to, but I've also asked Christine Vitale, who's the head of the Board of Ed, what she knows or has access to, because if anything went out to the students or to the school community, she would know. So hopefully she'll answer me within the time frame of this call.
there was a goal to develop a survey and send it out based on using these other surveys, or is it to get the data and use it for something else?
I think from my understanding from our last few conversations is there's a bit of, there's a bit of learning that we can do from looking at existing survey data in terms of, are these questions the right questions that we'd want to ask? Is it getting the right kind of data in that turns into stuff that's really actionable for us to move forward with? Do we want to ask different questions? I think Alexandra, we had talked about, is it representative of our population? So I think looking at what they've asked, it's going to have the bias of, if it comes from the Board of Ed, I'm going to have my education hat on. So there's going to be the information kind of is going to be skewed towards people in the education community. So everybody know that's only one facet of our town. So we need to just take a look at everything, kind of review it as the secondary data that it is, and then mine it for insights, but also what do we need to do differently with the groups that we want to talk to and serve.
Are we sending out a survey?
Yeah, so I was just thinking in terms of timeline, right? If we're going to be putting together a survey, what would that look like? How would we go? What were the steps of putting it together, and when would we want to, make our target for when we wanted to?
Or do we make that a
out there.
recommendation that they send out? I mean, that was my original question. Are we supposed to be doing that? Are we supposed to be recommending that the task force, if we recommend a permanent task force, that they send out a survey? And that's A, and then B, I think we should put together a survey and say, this is what we're doing. And because to set the expectation that they think that we're going to be answering all these questions, that's not what we're charged with. We're charged with
The blueprint.
the framework. So we want to make that clear. If we go to Fairfield Ubantu, we're there to gather information to put together a framework for if there's a permanent task force to do the work. That's the question I have, the fundamental question I have.
I mean, but that goes back to my question about with Karen when I was asking you and Alex specifically and Sonia last time about, and you said, well, some of this has to inform what would be in a survey. And by the way, Christine Vitale did get back to me, and Fairfield Public Schools or the Board of Ed, they haven't done anything in the past. So nothing exists even.
So what's that survey that I don't know who was recalling it, but
Yeah,
then
when I brought it up and you said, to what end? What are we asking and what are we looking for and what does it really tell us?
yeah,
And
no,
I
I'm
guess this
sorry.
goes
I was
back to
just
this idea of the
I mean, I think, and I definitely think that this is something we should discuss, whether we think that that this survey should be something that we say that the permanent task force does, or is it the work of this task force?
Right.
Well, or yeah, and I think that's a decision that'll have to be made, and maybe not, again, maybe let Alexandra and Sonia and I connect on it. But the idea is, do we want to have some benchmark data to then say in our blueprint and the permanent task force, you need to improve some of this stuff. So,
we need a pre-survey that tees up the real.
because we want a baseline, right? Or a baseline
Yeah.
for improvement. And maybe that's what we need to, maybe that's our work, is to do some baseline research so that they know, do some work and then retest the population or recheck the population, see if your permanent task force is making the strides that we hope.
And I think so in terms of like timeline, right? Because
Yeah.
I think that is a discussion that we need to have and probably like as a group vote on and make a firm decision about that.
Yeah.
When would we, at what point do we want to make that decision? Like, I know that our next phase right now is, so Stephen, Doug's information is going to then inform what your group is going to be working on, Karen, Sonia, and Alexandra.
Yeah.
Could we agree as a group that at that point, when you kind of come back with how we can, slice the cat or whatever that expression is, like how we're going to actually, move forward with that from kind of a, the research point, then like immediately after that, do we then say, okay, this is how we're going to move forward? Because I'd like to, make that actionable. Like if that's something that we're going to do, I'd like to kind of get that decision made.
We can add dates to our recommendations, that we put together for the next time that we meet. My experience is that we're now entering a really crappy time of year to do any kind of survey research. It's the holidays, forget it. Like they're not going to give it their attention. So that doesn't mean we couldn't start, looking at secondary sources, looking at data, reviewing what already exists, having a few expert conversations. We can do that. But any kind of a survey effort, that timeline should be, let's do something like that in January.
We got a year.
That gives us a year, right? That gives us a year to say, now we know what this data is. And then when we hand off in January of 2022, it's
I have an idea.
Yes,
I'm going to share the screen again. This is one of the places that we live. I'm going back to this again. And if we could just put the function, because we haven't started, this needs to be built up. Somebody needs to put what.
Who's in charge of that?
That's one of the things that I wanted to get out.
Yeah.
And I'm going to compare this to, I'll just do a brief comparison to like another one that's, I can't do it because you're in my way. Okay. To Fairfield Cares, which is built out a little more. See how they're more, they have more stuff in here. All this stuff over here, all these links, and this is ours. We don't have anything in ours. So we have to put our function, and if we put our function as what it is, then you can, then it's there, and we stated what it is, right? And then it's not, we don't need to do a survey for that. It's on our website. And then who's in charge of it, roles and responsibilities. I don't know who's in charge of, but we need to start. If you look at their files and documents, for example, there's a whole, it's organized into a long list of where we need to put our stuff kind of thing. And it has all, yeah, there it is. So then they have like all these files and documents in this, listed in these subcategories, right? Zoom meeting recordings, member orientation packet. You go to it and it has all the stuff in these. So that's what our website needs to look like. We need to have somebody do it, I mean, that's.
Yeah. I don't know, were you on the call when we decided Ryan's actually going to take on that role? I'm not sure if that was before you joined us, but that is our goal, to kind of start to get some of that information up there. And Nancy and I are going to kind of, run the things that we want to put in our files and documents through. But I think that is definitely part of the plan to have that exist there. But I guess kind of going back to what Karen was saying, my question was, I think I think it'd be great if you can come back with kind of a timeline. And in terms of you know, when, it can be whenever, like we said, we have a year to get this
Right.
done. And if you think the best time for a survey to go out is March, that's great.
But I
It's just, we
something
want to
about
put that on
the
this. But Ryan,
survey.
yeah?
About the survey. I mean, you know, in terms of the listening and listening being an important function of the task force, so that the things that we take on to do truly reflect what the pulse of the community is. A first survey could be complementary to the community conversations. It could be a way of extending the community conversation of where you have targeted groups.
Very different objectives. Yeah.
And exactly. So of where you're trying to gauge a pulse. What are the perceptions in town? What are perceptions within this? Do people generally feel, you know, things are fair? Did they see inequity? Did they to get some kind of data? At the same time, you're having conversations that ask very similar questions and drill down in a deeper way. And you put those two things together, which are complementary, that begin to build what you will do in terms of what the priorities are. Like, what are the things that emerge out of those conversations? And just in the same way that initial conversation, when you heard from 9 people, you could hear very clearly, you know, police, education, housing, these things emerge and you get a pulse. So an initial survey could be very much a listening survey, a pulse kind of thing. So, you know, without making it too overly complicated, and it could be very complementary to saying, yes, we want to have some community. Maybe there are 9 community conversations. They're publicized. There's a lot of opportunity for people to come in smaller groups with special interests and reflect. But at the same time, hundreds of people could participate in the survey and you could gather broader information.
Let me ask you a question, Nancy, in terms of like Robert's rules. Do we have to, if we wanted to, as a group, make a decision about whether or not we're going to send a survey out, like a yes or no kind of thing? Is that the kind of thing that has to be on the agenda, or can we just?
Yep.
Okay,
I mean,
so can we then
can have an
say that?
We can have an
that for the
informal
next
discussion. Yeah.
Well, I would just say that, so that in interest of time too, that for the next meeting, when Karen, Alex, and Sonia's group comes back to make their proposal, that at that point we will vote on whether or not the group is going to send out a survey. And then we can, you know, so we can, at your,
the vote, not to cut you off, Gina, but the vote should be on the research plan in general, which
yes,
probably is the survey, but also is maybe some phone calls, which also might be some, you know, group conversations. Like, there's going to be elements of the research plan that aren't black and white per se. You know, it's not going to be just one thing. It's multifaceted, just like our work is.
So do you think that would be, is it reasonable time frame wise that could be something that will be on the agenda for voting for next meeting?
Yeah, I think that's our hope and wish to do that. Alexandra, you agree?
Yeah, because we're meeting on the 9th, and then our next meeting is on the 17th, it looks like.
Yeah, so between our meeting on Monday and the 17th, we'll get the work done to get the research plan to put before this group. We'll make sure we have timelines for it. And so that we can take a look at that, and if it needs to be tweaked or adapted, that can all be factored into the vote after discussion, right? Maybe.
So yeah. So let's put that on the agenda for the next meeting, kind of as our like top priority, because at that point, I think we can kind of take the research plan as it comes back and then get divided so that people can then take their work that they are then going to do to take out to do the next step.
Right.
Because I think we've got a lot of good information that came in after this meeting. I want to make sure that, you know, everybody has tasks moving forward so that we're kind of keeping the momentum going. So if that's okay with everyone, I think that's kind of, we'll shift to that.
And as long as we're speaking about the agenda, 2 things, I just asked a question in the chat. Should we do it as a hear and consider, or a hear, consider, and act? Because for the
I would say
plan-
hear, consider, and act, because I want to like, I really want to get going.
Okay.
So I would say that the next meeting we're going to hear, consider, and really that's going to take some time. And I don't know that we need a lot more on the agenda besides that. That I feel like the next meeting should be about, because we've now kind of gotten a little bit of information and we're all kind of on the same page, but I think we're all kind of anxious to actually then to dive in, to have the work to do.
The other thing
So-
is though, you know, we have this consistent group in our short while here of, you know, the public and now including Sophia, and I'm so happy that you've joined us. Should we have Sophia kind of reporting in or someone that Sophia, you know, talks to report in on the various groups that are coming up? Like, you know, Riney, I see you here, but like, should we keep that on the agenda as well? Just like presentations from outside
Yeah,
groups?
I mean,
'Cause
I
again,
think
we
that- I
can't
think
add info until December.
I think it's useful because again, this is a place where now we can publicize these sort of things. So like this is another way for the community to know what happened in the high school and this action that they took that goes beyond just people who are related to the group. And I think that's really important to continue to be a voice for that, because that is again about how we're going to really build this, you know, what do our constituents need? What is benefiting this community? What do people in our community find important? And I think that's something that, you know, part of listening is to be able to also amplify. I think we talked about that a little bit too.
And
So I would love to keep that on there.
And I also think, you know, going back to this idea of Ryan, what Ryan will be administering, you know, having a place where we don't necessarily have to put every event on upcoming event that relevant groups, like if Fairfield Ubuntu, if someone wants to list a meeting there, maybe there is a place where they email us or, you know, me, you. And that's the kind of thing that we could add to, you know, a calendar tab or,
Yeah.
you know, so.
And again, I'd like to kind of say, you know, in the interest of time too, because we're kind of getting close to the end here, that, you know, when I think our main agenda item is to kind of here consider and act on kind of our next 6-month plan of like what the work that we're going to be doing. And so we'll take a lot of time at the next meeting to really kind of break down those different pieces, figure out what those committees are. Because my hope is that we're going to take what you come back with and really at that point say, okay, this is my area that I'm going to take on going for the next piece. So I think if we kind of make the agenda for the next meeting, really, that's the bulk of it. Plus, you know, the same thing that we always do, which is hearing from the community in the beginning and, you know, any updates at the end. I don't know if there's anything else that anybody would really think is important to be on the agenda. I feel like there's just a lot of work there already. Brian?
Did we want to try to find out, or does somebody already know about the diversity conversations that took place in the past?
So Rainey posted a few of them in the chat. There was one on June 11th, one on June 24th.
No, those, not those, but I mean, these diversity conversations that took place like a couple of years ago, that was referred to like, oh, we've had these diversity conversations, like, you know, not this past June, like maybe the year before or something like that.
I'll ask Kristen McCarthy-Vahey. She and you know, Riney, I know might have had some insight, but Kristen is always a good source for that.
Yeah, I was going to volunteer to talk to her if you want me to.
Yeah, great.
That'd be great.
Okay, I'll report on that.
And so when we're talking about the you know, their work, we can kind of bring that up. All right, well, I don't want to, I think the last item on the agenda is to, if any other advocacy groups or updates or anything like that. I do know that, I think, Sophia, isn't there going to be like a youth conversation about the election coming up? Did I see something like that?
I am aware of one that's happening tonight at 8. I'm not sure if I'm thinking of the same one.
I think that's the same one. Who's sponsoring that?
I can check. I have the email.
I just want to put it on the record.
Sure. It is.
Jason, did you know?
Yeah, I just want to quickly add to the, no, go ahead, Sophia, sorry.
It's sponsored by Student Voice.
Who's student? Oh, so your group?
It's not from our group, but I guess there's an organization called Student Voice. It was passed on to me by Mr. from Ward.
So that's happening.
But I wasn't previously aware of the group.
Okay. Jason, did you have something?
We were discussing other advocacy groups and, you know, Sophia just mentioned, but I wanted to bring up John Whaley and the FEA, the Anti-Racism Committee. That might be something we also want to get involved in. People mentioned a lot about Fairfield Ubuntu, so I think the group is pretty familiar with that effort. We heard from Sophia tonight about the Voices of Ward Equity Group and the alumni group that they have going. But I think that another group that we probably want to get involved with or start talking with is the Anti-Racism Committee, which is part of the subcommittee of the FEA, the Fairfield Education Association. John Whaley is a co-chair of that. And Molly introduced something that Molly McHugh was a part of one of our meetings a couple of weeks ago and introduced the land acknowledgement, which Amy attended last week. So I think they're doing some really good things in the community, and we probably want to be in communication with them.
If I can just, I second what Jason said, and also, you know, going back to what Steve had mentioned about how we need to organize our website. I'm a member of the public, but I just wanted to mention there are a few things that I'm noticing here that even including Innie had mentioned about the holistic approach of what we're doing. Okay, so let's just be frank. Okay, we need to be holistic about what we're doing. And so the fact that we're mentioning engaging John Whaley, engaging Ubuntu, you know, you have to, I know that Steve, you mentioned them a few times, but look, they serve a purpose. They are more tuned into academia and tuned into reading books about white fragility, reading books about all sorts of other things that are focused on racial biases, conscious biases, unconscious biases, all sorts. So they're more tuned into academia as per se. So, but as a group, I think that we really need their blessing, okay? Because they have a voice. They have a voice and they are connecting with the community in ways that we are probably not going to be able to communicate with the community because of our restrictions as being affiliated with the town. So I think it's really important that we forge some type of alliance with them as well, whether we like it or not. I think that it's good. It would be safe to do that, just as well as with John Whaley, who I admire. He's amazing. He's doing a lot of great work with the millennials and the high school students and so forth. But I definitely think that we need to have some kind of subcategory, which has been mentioned before, but I just want to echo that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, ultimately, the members of Fairfield Ubuntu are citizens of this town, which means that we, you know, we have a mandate to listen to them. And that is what we do here. You know, our job is to really hear what the town wants and needs and elevate that. And so I think that's why we're always going to leave that section in our group. But I hope that when we talk about the plan next week, that will be something that'll be a piece of it. And maybe we can, like, you know, piece that out a little bit more clearly and figure out how we're going to actually do that. So what I would love to see happen at the end of the meeting, our next meeting, is that we walk away with our action plan for the next phase. Because that's, I think we have a lot of these really great ideas, and now I want to get to them. I want to start to, you know, to look at, you know, how, you know, Innie, what you said, like, how do we engage with our faith leaders? I want to look at how are we engaging with groups like Ubuntu? How are we engaging with our educators? How are we engaging with the police? You know, over the course of this call, we've had a few, we brought up a few people that I think we can talk to, and we can kind of decide too in our conversation next week how we want to handle that. Is that people that we want to invite into the meeting? Do we want to go out to them? So, like, in terms of what the meeting is going to be about next week, I think our next meeting, it's really going to be about making those concrete action steps for the next, you know, 3 to 6 months, so that we know exactly, you know, where we're headed. Yeah. So with that, did anyone have anything else that they wanted to add? This was a very great meeting. You guys did some really excellent work coming in. Would anyone like to move to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Seconded. Anyone want to second that motion?
Seconded.
Second motion.
So who seconded that? Any? And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Okay, meeting adjourned at 8:01. I
Thank
look
you all.
forward to hearing from you all next time. Bye, thank you.
Everybody. Night.
Bye.